Hey, it's Jess. After months and months of conversations with other marketers, with clients, and doing this work for a handful of clients, I've decided to talk about GEO, AEO, and SEO and pulling it all together. How you can optimize to be found online from search or AI, regardless of where someone's coming from. Now, there are a lot of videos out there talking about AEO and GEO and the 10 things you need to do to get found in ChatGPT and all that stuff. What makes this different is, first off, you're going to see it's a long ass video. It's long because there's a lot to cover, but it's also long because I made it modular. So if you are already familiar with SEO, you're confident in your technical SEO game, you know that you have stuff set up right, skip ahead to the section that you want. If you're new to this world though, and you haven't done SEO before, start at the beginning and work your way through. I would encourage you, even if you're an expert, if you've done this before, I would still encourage you to skim through the sections you already know, because you never know when a tip or an item is going to come out of nowhere and help you see something you didn't see before. So there is value in looking through all of the content, but this is designed for you to be able to skip around to whatever you need. Second, what makes this different is that we are here to talk about building sustainable strategies. We're not just here to learn a couple tactics or tips or hacks to help you rank for the next 2 or 3 months. We are here to talk about building a sustainable, scalable system for you to consistently be found online. And third, we are optimizing for the future. So everything we talk about here is made to be built upon. AI is not the final frontier. There's going to be another technology that comes out following it. I don't know, maybe Claude Bot will become sentient and it will want to find whatever service you offer. This is all made with design intent in mind, that eventually you're going to be adding new technologies that we don't even know about yet on top of it. Now, the number one reason we're talking about AEO and GEO is that according to Search Engine Land, 37% of searches as of today, which is February 2026, 37% of searches begin online with AI, not with traditional search engines. That is why we're talking about AEO and GEO along with SEO. Because if you ignore SEO, you're missing over half of your potential audience. If you ignore AEO and GEO, you're missing almost half of your potential audience. So we want to look at how the three play together and how you can really do one piece of work that's going to optimize for all three tools. We are going to walk through, can the robots read your site? Can the robots read the content on your site? Are you quotable? This section really focuses on EEAT and having that authority that makes you quotable for AI. And then lastly, we're going to have a section on how to fast track all of this with paid advertising. Now, in an ideal world, your organic strategy is well built out, it's executed flawlessly, and you're able to rank for everything you've ever wanted to rank for without any paid spend. We don't live in that world though. And the reality is, if you're willing to spend some money, there are ways that you can accelerate all of this. So we'll go over all those options in the paid advertising section. Lastly, we have what is essentially the appendix section of this video. If this was just a slide deck, it would be the appendix where we would throw different terms in there, stats, other resourcing, tooling. That's all going to get thrown in the very end of this video. It'll be bookmarked. You can see below here, wherever I am on the screen, you can see in the play bar where the different sections are. In the description also for this video, you'll be able to see even more timestamps for other sections within the section. So peruse at your leisure. If you're a beginner, and there's absolutely no shame in that, we all start somewhere. I want you to follow along in order. Start at the beginning and work your way through. The foundations are really built on each other. So don't skip ahead just because you're excited and want to see the advanced stuff. Trust me. The technical foundation in the first two sections is what makes everything else work. Now, if you're intermediate, if you've done SEO, maybe you've ran a few campaigns and you just want to level up, feel free to skim through the parts you already know, but I would encourage you to skim through instead of skipping completely. Sometimes we think we know something, and then when we actually get down to auditing, we find there's a few issues that we weren't even thinking about. So you might still pick up something good. Now, if you're advanced, if you've already been running successful SEO campaigns for years, you can jump straight ahead to Are You Quotable or Fast Tracking with Paid Advertising. I would, though, similar to intermediary, I would encourage you to skim through the sections that you think you already know. There's no wrong way to use this video, though. Skip what you don't want, look at what you do, and go at your pace. One thing I want to stress so importantly with all of this is none of us really know what we're doing. I am sharing with you what's worked for my clients, what I've seen work with other marketers across the board, and what should work based on how we've been told these different algorithms work. At the end of the day, though, we don't really know how they work. There is no specific guide that ChatGPT has put out on how to rank in ChatGPT. We're all just testing things. And the most important thing you can take away from this video is to embrace a testing ideology. Test what you hear, see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. What works for someone else may genuinely work for them, and it may not work for you because your audience is different or a whole ton of other factors. So keep an open mind, put on your scientist hat, and test everything. If we haven't met yet, I'm Jess. I'm a seasoned marketer. I love marketing. I talk about this stuff all the time. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the best spot to message if you have any questions specific, or leave them in the comments below. And lastly, before we get started, I want to share with you my philosophy with this video. And this is really my approach to marketing overall. We are in it for the long haul. Our goal is to build a brand, build awareness for something that's going to be lasting for the long run. It's going to be here in 10, 20, 30 years plus. And so everything we're doing has design intent, that we know we're building something and we're going to keep building upon it. We're doing things that are not black hat, that are not going to put our brand at risk and put us at risk of getting banned or ruining our online reputation. Everything we're doing is sustainable and designed to continue to scale, and we're making data-driven decisions. We are looking at our data and we're seeing what it tells us. In the marketing world, I think that there are way more people than other industries that are telling people what works and what doesn't work with no actual data backing it. Or they're sharing strategies that someone else recommended that they haven't tested themselves, and they're sharing the wrong way to do it. If your data shows that something doesn't work, don't try and force it to work for you. It might just not work for your audience. So keep an eye on your data, see where it leads you, and keep an open testing mind. First up, can the robots read your site? Because if they cannot read your site, you don't even exist to them. So before we dive into it, I want you to check and make sure that you have access to two tools. Google Search Console, which is the mechanism in which you submit your sitemap to Google. So this is probably already set up. Number two, though, I'm betting that you don't have it set up, and that is Bing Webmaster Tools. Bing is the most slept on platform in general. They have Webmaster Tools, which are built essentially for Google Search Console to easily push data into it, but it's a fantastic tool suite. But also, Bing in general is a great search engine. It's been growing in popularity. A lot of AI uses Bing to access the web. And if you're not including it in part of your SEO strategy, you're missing out on potentially up to a third of traffic. So pause this video, make sure you have both of those set up, and then come back and hit play. So how do the robots read? How do crawlers work? They start with finding your website either through you having submitted it into Search Console or another tool, or maybe your website is linked to from other websites that are indexed, but they find your website somehow. They go through and they will check your robots.txt file to see if they have permission to view your site. Now, not everyone listens to it, but in theory, if they're being good digital citizens, the robot should listen to your request in robots.txt. Then they'll go and they'll look at your sitemap. They will crawl across your entire website, and depending on what their goal is, they'll ingest that information differently. And then they will take your site and they will index that information so they can come back and easily reference it later. Now, with traditional search, they're going to be ranking it so they understand your domain authority and some other factors. For GEO or AEO, they are going to be actually citing it. So that's our goal. When it comes to crawlers, your traditional search bots behave very different from your newer AI bots. I would think of it as your traditional search bots have proper etiquette and manners. They're going to show up to your house not empty-handed. They're going to be polite. They're going to take off their shoes and their jacket, where AI just kind of does what it wants. Now, fundamentally, the crawlers are doing two different things. The robots have two different jobs. For traditional search, they want to understand your website, the structure, the content. They want to index it so that they know when to come back to you for an answer. AI, on the other hand, wants to consume you. They're very content hungry, they're very aggressive with hitting, and they do not always respect the rules that you set out in your robots.txt file. I will have a tip a little bit later on how to monitor and see if those robots are not listening to you, so you know who you may want to block or at least handle differently, I would say. But AI it's interesting, and it's just going to keep changing as the platforms themselves continue evolving. Now, some names that you may recognize when you start looking through your server logs or you're going through further into this course, here are the common AI crawlers. One thing I want to call out is Google Bot is Google's organic search. Google Extended is what they're using for Gemini, Bard, and different training. So here are common AI crawlers that you may see reference, and I have some notes with them. Now, what happens when the robots arrive? They start by going to the robots.txt file, which they are looking to for instruction on where to find your sitemap, and then any rules of engagement with spots they should go or shouldn't go. Again, caveat, they don't always listen to it. They should, but they don't. Next, they go to your sitemap. We're going to start with the robots.txt file. This is an example of what one could look like. From the top down, we're going to start with defining who can come to our site. In this example, we're allowing everyone. We're allowing all crawlers by default. So user agent asterisk means anyone, and then allow with the /. If you wanted to, from visiting your site, this is where you would do it. You would have it, and I have an example in the top right corner of if we want to block Claude. So we would have user agent Claude bot instead of that asterisk, and then disallow with the /. The next section, and you always want to start with the broadest permissions of the users. The next section, you want to disallow any pages that these bots should not be going to. For example, any of your admin pages, if you're using WordPress to host your website and your entry point for the backend is still /wp-admin, block that. If you have a cart page that is dynamic and updated, you want to block that. Any internal pages too that you may have someone on because it's part of, let's say, a testing program, block those. Anything that's not valuable for someone to find on your site who is just searching for the product or service you offer, any of those pages, just block them so you don't have to worry about the bots hitting them. I would also recommend this next section, adding a delay for AI bots that are crawling your site. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's a delay in how frequent the AI will hit your site. So if you have a really aggressive, really hungry AI that's going to crawl your entire site repeatedly multiple times, you don't want it to have that many calls towards you. It can actually cause a DDoS. Depending on your hosting. And I only know that because I've accidentally DDoSed my own personal site a couple times in the past, which we don't even talk about. But I recommend have a delay in there. Now, will the bots follow it? We don't know, but put it in there so if they do, at least you're asking them to slow the heck down and not run up your server costs. And lastly, you want to include your sitemap location. Now, you could have multiple sitemaps. That's not uncommon. And if so, you just have multiple lines here for those different sitemaps. Now, one big question you need to ask yourself is, do you want these AI crawlers to come to your site or not? Your answer is probably you want them coming to your site if you're watching this and trying to learn how to get found in the age of AEO and GEO, but there may be instances where you don't. If you have a massive website with 50,000 plus pages, that is going to be really heavy for them to scrape your entire site. If you have a lot of proprietary data, it could be really heavy. There's a lot of good reasons not to want AI on your site. The important thing to know is you can change your mind at any time. but anything that's already been scraped is not going to be deleted. So if you say, hey, I'm really sick of AI, we're not getting any leads from it, it doesn't make sense for us to allow these bots to train their systems on our content, we're going to start blocking them. Cool. It won't add anything new, but anything they already scraped is still there. So think about it, weigh the benefits and the trade-offs, and make a decision for yourself. Common mistakes that people make with the robots.txt file. The number one thing that I see, in addition to not having one, you would actually be surprised how many companies do not have this set up. But the number one thing that I'll see, aside from not having one, is disallowing everything. And then people wonder, why isn't Google serving me any traffic? Why am I not getting found anywhere? Well, you're telling the robots not to come to your site. You're telling them not to look at you. So number one mistake, disallowing everything. The second one that I see less frequently in recent years, but I used to see more frequently, is back in early 2000s. It wasn't uncommon to block JavaScript or CSS loading because at the time websites were built differently. But in today's day and age, you often need CSS to run for your content to even load. So some people historically have blocked that. We don't want to block it anymore because it is vital for content to actually be seen on the site. And then lastly is being too aggressive with the pages and the categories that you're blocking. We don't want to disallow our product pages. We don't want to disallow the core service that we offer. So making sure that we're not being too aggressive with the disallow list. Now let's take a pause. So after I finish saying this, hit pause on the video and go and check and see if you have a robots.txt file up. I'm going to move to the next slide, which will have a copy of that example file. So if you're missing your robots.txt file, take a moment, open Notepad on your computer and make your own file and then upload it and index it. So after our robots visit robots.txt, they're going to end with going to the sitemap. So let's talk about setting up your sitemap. Now, if robots.txt is essentially the file that tells robots how to behave and what the etiquette is around here, your sitemap is telling them where to go so that they don't spend time in stuff that doesn't matter, where they're going to get lost. This is what a typical sitemap will look like. You'll have an opening section where you're going to define your website, the frequency that it's updated so that the bots know how frequently to come back and look for new content on your site, and then a priority. Now, the way sitemaps typically work, they're pretty big. You want to have every page on your site that matters listed. Not every page matters. And that's where the priority comes in. So if you have pages that are, let's say, your focus pages for services you offer or pages that you're designing to be ranked in SEO, you want to rate those higher in the priority than pages like your contact information, where someone may navigate to it if they need it, but it's not the page you want people going to from search. If you are using a modern CMS, it likely has a tool that will help you make a sitemap. If not, SEMrush has tools, and there's a lot of tools out there that will help you build this, because manually doing this is a nightmare. I haven't manually made a sitemap since like the early 2000s. Thank goodness for tools out there because it can take forever. Now, a few things to keep in mind with your sitemap is that you want to make sure that you're only including canonical original URLs. So if you have some content that's duplicated where you're using non-canonicals to indicate what page the original is, you just want that original on there. You don't want to have duplicative content. Ideally in size, you keep it under 50,000 URLs. So if you have a large commerce site or just a large site in general, you may want to trim that down. When your sitemap is ready to be updated, you want to submit it to Google Search Console and to Bing Webmaster Tools. Now, there are also some third-party tools you can use that are constantly submitting updated pages. Your CMS may also do this on your behalf, so you'll want to double check. We'll talk about in a moment how to check when it was last submitted and how to submit your sitemap. Things you want to not do in your sitemap is you don't want to include any pages that are broken, any pages that go to 404 or URLs that may still exist, but they redirect to a different URL. You want to just include that final unique URL. don't include any pages that you have blocked in your robots.txt file. Because again, with a sitemap, our goal is to tell the robots where to go look for our great content. And so if something's already blocked in robots.txt, there's no need to include it in your sitemap itself. And most importantly, you don't want this to go stale. So if you're making big changes to your website where you're adding a bunch of new pages or changing URL structure, you want to make sure that you update and submit your fresh sitemap so that the search engines know where to find content. Let's take a quick pause and make sure you have a sitemap. So go to your, whatever your domain is, your site.com/sitemap.xml. If you get a 404 page, it means you do not have a sitemap. So check that. And now, I'm assuming you already checked it and you came back and hit play, fixed it if you needed to. Now let's see when the last time it was updated or submitted to Google was. We're going to go into Google Search Console. And you'll select your property on the top left, and then you'll go under sitemaps and you'll see a list of all of the sitemaps that have been submitted. Again, you can have multiple sitemaps. That's not uncommon. So find the most recent one and see when it was submitted, when it was last read, and if there's any errors. Now, the great thing with Search Console is it's really user-friendly. So you'll see here where it says one error. If that is showing up in your Search Console, click on it where it says one error, and it's going to tell you exactly what that error is, and it'll often give you tips to fix it. In Bing Webmaster Tools, very similar process. So go in, you will select your property, and then go to sitemaps, and you can see last submitted, last crawled, and what the status is. Here we have a warning status, which would be the same as the error in Search Console. So in this case, again, you would click on warning, and you would see what that warning is. Now, there are a few more optional pages that have been rising in popularity recently. There is not one AI-focused page that is considered the standard protocol for everyone. You will see some people use LLMs.txt, and some people use AI.txt. I'm discussing these interchangeably because they are essentially serving the same purpose with just different names for how they're being called. If you wanted to hedge your bets on everything, you would make one of each, just in case one of the bots checks AI and one checks LLMS, you're called up. The goal of LLMS or AI.txt is to tell the AI what the priority pages and priority information is. So your sitemap lists everything on your website. This would only list the things that the LLMs really care about. And ideally, you'd have it organized in a way that makes it easier for them to parse. Because again, AI is reading for comprehension. Google search and traditional search is reading to index. So here's an example where we have our company name, a little bit about what the company does, information, key resources, authority content, because we want to establish that EEAT, citation preferences. Again, robots sometimes follow, sometimes don't. No clue if it'll actually follow it, but in this example, we have a citation preference, and then the do not use pages. Humans.txt is a new page that I've only seen coming up recently, and I would say like the last few months. I think it's fun, and I think there's opportunity to use this file to help improve your authority. Now, I haven't heard any positive confirmations from Google that they care about this at all, but we know Google and the LLMs both care heavily about authority. We have a whole section dedicated to it. And so worst case, spend 5 minutes making this. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. You'll have to see what the data says. Essentially, the guidance with the humans.txt is to call out the actual humans who are behind your company or your website or your content and helping really build it. When we get into the authority part, we're going to talk about author pages. And what I would think about here on the humans and what I advise clients to think about with the humans.txt page is essentially using your authorship information and putting that on this page so it's in a more condensed area. You may have 50, 60 authors who contribute to your site, but maybe 10 of them are the ones that you're really trying to grow as authorities on the matter. You would include the 10 of them here. And any other humans that have good linking potential to other third-party high authority sites. So, big question might be on your mind. How do I know if I'm actually getting visited by robots? How do I know what they're doing? Server logs are the number one spot to look. Now, it may sound intimidating if you are not a technical person and you may not actually have direct access to this. Talk to your engineering team or whoever hosts your website, ask them for help. But server logs are the number one spot to see if you're being visited by bots. Secondary to that, your CDN or your DNS provider may have additional reporting on bot traffic. Bot traffic itself is something that is typically filtered out when it comes to Google Analytics or other web traffic reporting systems. And it's something that is being paid attention to by CDNs and DNS providers because it can often be an indication of something happening, potentially a bot attack or something bad on your site. So they typically have reporting that will speak to it that is readily accessible. In Google Analytics, depending on how your instance is set up, you can also see in there, I put in here an example of going into the acquisition report and looking at your source medium. Now, in theory, you should have bot filtering enabled. This is something that almost everyone has. I think I met one person in my career that didn't have it. It should be enabled, which means that you should only be seeing referral traffic from those sources, not traffic from their bots actually indexing your site. So this is a bit hit or miss, but there are new bots out there that Google doesn't know about, that they don't have them grouped into channels yet. So it can still show up in that report. And lastly, this is a bit of an unconventional way, but if you're in Search Console and you're looking at the queries that are driving people to your site, there is a theory that typically AI and bots are going to be using longer queries. And so if you actually go and you filter your queries by anything over 7 words, that can give you an idea of how much traffic LLMs are sending your way and if it's increasing or decreasing. What I've included here is a regex formula that will look at any queries containing 7 or more words in the query itself. And lastly, how do we know if robots are coming to our site and they are not listening to our robots.txt file? What you can do is you can actually create a file, essentially a little trap for them, create a file, disallow it in your robots.txt file, and then check your server logs and see if you're getting bot traffic to it. If you are, you know that those are bots that are not respecting your rules, and it's up to you on how you want to deal with them. So we have robots coming to visit our site. Now we've confirmed they can access our pages. The next step is making sure they can read the content that is written on those pages. This is the part that most people mess up when it comes to getting found online. So we're going to talk through semantic HTML, which I think of as essentially the guide we're giving to the robots when they get to the page on how to read the content. We're going to go through best practices in terms of heading structure, because this is low-hanging fruit for a lot of people watching this video. We are going to talk about how to organize content to be more likely to be included in featured snippets and to be included in AI citations. And lastly, we're going to talk through some of the navigational elements that you can use to help improve understanding of content on the page. First up, semantic HTML. I like to think of semantic HTML in terms of, are we helping guide the way that the content should be read or not? Or are we just throwing a bunch of content onto a page and saying good luck and walking away? Visually, what it can look like is, now this is to a robot, is you have a page that's just a bunch of content on the left, or do you have a page that tells you, here's the header, here's the nav, here's a section, here's an article, here's a graph, here's a blah, 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 right? What we are essentially doing is we are creating the roadmap for how the robot should read the page in order to best ingest the information. Now, it's more important than just robots though. Having good semantic HTML ensures that we are helping set up the page to be read by accessibility tools, ensuring that keyboard navigation for those who are not using a mouse is easier to complete and a better user experience overall, including humans who are coming to the site to read your content. Having good semantic HTML set up will help make your content more readable for the human visitors. So back to robots though. Now, we've talked before about the difference between traditional search bots and AI. As a reminder, traditional search bots are going through and they're trying to index your site and understand when they should come back and reference it. So when they go through and look at content, they're looking at that heading structure and they're going through and reading, where's my H1? Okay, where's all my H2s? Where's my H3? Let me really understand exactly what is here so I can come back and reference it later. When it comes to AI bots, remember, they kind of do what they want a lot of the time. And so they're looking more to understand your content. Now, having it well structured and organized helps them in reading to understand it, but they're not as, I would say they care less about your H2, H3 being perfectly aligned to whatever versus the traditional SEO bot, but it's still really important because it helps with that consumability. As an example, let's say that we have an article about sourdough bread. I started putting together this deck before lunch, so there's a continuous theme of sourdough bread going through here. But what Google will see when it goes and looks at that page is it will look at it and see, okay, this is an article on how to bake sourdough bread. Here's everything that's included. Here's other links to reputable sources. And I understand this and I'm going to index it. So if I need a good sourdough bread recipe, I'll come back to it. AI, on the other hand, is going through and they're reading through it for comprehension, which means they're understanding that it's like a detailed guide to bake sourdough bread, including tips on ratios and all these intricate questions, and it links out to other good data that would be good to include. And so if someone asks me about sourdough bread, I can reference this method and cite it. They read similarly, but two different goals in mind. So when it comes to H1 tags, these matter a lot to traditional SEO bots. H1 is essentially you telling the bot what that page is about. My recommendation, and we'll go through some best practices with H1 tags, my recommendation is to have a unique H1 tag per page. Your homepage should be whatever your main keyword that you're trying to really own in search, and then your additional pages should all ladder back and support that. You want one H1 tag, and then your sections, like if we're writing a 5-paragraph essay, our H2 is our next header that we go through, and then under H2, we would have H3 embedded in it, and H4 is embedded in H3, which is embedded in H2, so on and so on. What this looks like for sourdough bread, specifically, you'll see we have how to make sourdough bread. That's our H1. That's what we want to appear against in search results. And we have our ingredients you'll need. And then under the ingredients, which is our H2, in our H3, we're breaking it down even more in between the starter and the dough. H2, we have our step-by-step instructions. H3, we're going into those instructions. And then if we have a subset, like you'll see under day 6, because this is a multi-day process, we have H4 in there because it's a subset of that H3. So the best spot to start really when you're writing any content for SEO is start with this layout. What is the keyword that you want to optimize for? And then what are you going to talk about within your content? Other terms that you'll see that are part of semantic HTML include this list here. We will go through a lot of these as we keep going through this. There are a ton of great resources online. Also, I'll have a bunch of them linked to in the ClickUp doc for where you can go to learn more about what to use when. A lot of your modern CMS tools will help you with this. You aren't going to need to do a lot of hand coding over here. So most CMS tools will help you with it, but it's really important to understand what it means. The golden rule of SEO, and the rule that I would put forward to stress the most, and this is the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of people out there, is having one H1 tag per page. Now, if you use a tool like Ahrefs or Screaming Frog personally is one of my favorite tools. If you use those, it is going to give you a list of what your H1 tag is for every page, and it's going to flag for you if you have any duplicated H1s. There are instances where you may see 2 H1 tags that are identical on a page if you have a responsive site. There's a couple other edge cases, but typically the most common thing I see is there's an H1 that was intentionally put there that is the keyword you're trying to optimize for. And then there's an H1 that is there accidentally because when building the content on the page, someone selected H1 because they wanted the font to be bigger. That is the most common use case. We want to use CSS and I would say the rich text editor to change font sizes, weights, all of that, and just use the H1 tags, H2, 3, 4, etc. to indicate your content structure. I jumped ahead a little bit, but it's a natural segue into it. So number one thing to check, and I would say pause this video, pull up Ahrefs, SEMrush, Screaming Frog, whatever your tool is, pull it up and go check your website and see if you have multiple H1 tags on any pages or if you are completely missing H1 tags from some pages. And then I'm pausing back here. So additional best practices, and I did talk a little bit about this, but number one H1 tag per page. Number two is do not skip headers. Oftentimes people use the header tags as a way to format and adjust font size. We don't want to do that because what happens if we have an H1 tag, no H2 tag, and then we go straight to H3, the bots will understand there's a chunk missing. They're going to see it as incomplete and they're not going to want to index that page for you. So make sure that you are structuring it H1, H2, A3, 4, blah, all the way down. Use headings for structure, not style. We touched on that a handful of times. I probably can't say it enough though, because this is a very common error. I mean, this is something I did in the beginning of my career, like 2 decades ago. So it's a common thing that people do. Nothing to be ashamed of. Just don't use it for adjusting how the font looks. Make headings as descriptive and accurate as possible without being overly verbose. So I have some examples here. If you have a page that is, let's go to what is technical SEO as this example, you don't want your header to be introduction. If you want to have it say introduction and have it be bold, use, again, CSS formatting for that word itself, but you want to have headers set in that are more descriptive, like what is technical SEO? How to implement technical SEO, how to measure your technical SEO success. That's telling the bots what those sections are about. In your headers, when you think about how you're writing them out, include related keywords. You want to make sure that you're not just including the main keyword that you're trying to optimize for in that H1 tag, but you have related terms. So when the robot comes to read your site, it sees that you have all these supported and relating terms that are representing content on the page also. And last, do not use H tags in your site navigation. Now, it can be confusing, and I understand where this comes from, but you want to make sure that when you build your site nav, you're not adding in an H1, H2, H3 tag into that navigation itself. It will have consequences with your SEO because that is a global component, meaning it sits on every single page. So make sure in your nav, you do not have any H tags set. Lastly, I have some character recommendations on here. So as you're building these out, you want to stay within this limit because if it's longer than that, it's going to truncate it. And so not the entire thing will be seen, not the entire thing will be read, and it's going to be a bit of a weird experience if it cuts your sentence off mid-sentence. So try and stay within these character limitations. I would say use the space you have if you have it. If it makes sense for you to add another keyword in or add another term or two to make it human readable and add some value to search, do it, but don't overly keyword stuff. One of the benefits of having structured data on our site is not just getting found, but getting included in featured snippets or AI overviews. Now, these are two features that are mutually exclusive. So on Google, when you search for something, you're going to see one or the other. And there's a good chance that you're going to be seeing the AI overview more and more as we go forward. The latest data that I've seen, which I linked to, has 83% of search results appearing with the AI overview and only 17% with featured snippets. It doesn't mean to ignore featured snippets and not care about it though, because when those do appear, the click-through rate is so much higher. Your featured snippet is one result. So it's going to have one quote from whatever that one link is and one link to go to. Much higher click-through rate versus AI overview, where it's pulling together a result, an answer based on multiple sites, and it typically links to 3 to 5 different sites. So not only do you have a lower click-through rate for the AI overview, you also have to compete now against other pages that are being included on it. So we're going to start with featured snippets because the other big win is that everything you would do to be seen in a featured snippet is something that is also helping you be seen as an AI citation for the AI overview. So the work is not wasted. It makes sense to do it anyways. And hey, if you can get a little piece of that higher click-through rate pie, why not go for it? One type of featured snippet is a paragraph snippet, where essentially if you ask a question, at the very top of your Google search result, you'll see a paragraph. with literally the answer and then a link to your site below it. In order to rank for these and try and get this placement, we want to make sure that we are structuring our answer as clear and concise and straightforward as possible and having it as early in our answer as possible. So our H2 tag here is the question that would match to the search query being made on Google. And then we immediately answer it. And we answer it in a very concise, straightforward manner. The green is an example of a good response. The red is an example of a bad response. Now, for a long time, Google favorited 2,000 word plus long articles. They love long form content. And so we would see as people starting blog entries or articles out with a very verbose opening that was grand, talking about the common kind of trope is you look for a pasta recipe and you get like 5,000 words on how this person grew up with their Italian grandma who would tell them about her cottage where her mom made pasta from scratch and blah, 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 blah. And it would take you a while to get into the actual answer. We're not doing that anymore. That is not a formula for success. We want to have our answer as clear and straightforward and top and center as possible. Another type of snippet is a list snippet. Most important thing here is making sure you're actually using a list markup with HTML and not just putting 1, 2, 3, 4. It will not see it as a list if you do not have the proper list formatting. Again, if you're using a modern CMS and you make it a bullet point list or a numbered list, it typically will do this on the back end for you. You'll just want to, as you go through or checking your SEO, keep an eye out for it. Additionally, you want to have between 5 and 8 items for these lists. Anything under that can be seen as incomplete. Anything over, you risk it being truncated. And again, continue using those H2 and H3 tags with your list to help make it relevant to that overall content you're trying to rank for. Lastly, you have table snippets. So this is really good for presenting data. AI especially loves a good table. Here, the most important thing to remember is having good column headers where you're being descriptive with it, but not overly verbose, and having your data structured as an actual table. You want to aim for 3 to 5 columns and 3 to 10 rows of data for your content to look complete. Now, for AI, we want to continue those formatting practices, and we want to add a layer of brevity on top of it, is how I think it could be best summarized. We want to make sure that we're really front-loading our answer and using definitive statements. So we're not coming in and saying, well, it could be this, or some people think this. We're saying, hey, here's your question, here's the answer, bam, done, cite me. Sounds a little aggressive, but you get where I'm going with it. If possible, add in data and statistics and have citations with it. So an example could be if you have a stat from Google, you could say, according to Google's guide, blah, 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 blah. Very easy to do. If you're listing out step-by-step instructions, make sure that, again, you're using those H2, H3 tags and having very clear, concise headers with it. Here's an example of what good looks like for step-by-step instructions. Here's an example of what good looks like for comparison. Now in this, you can see we have security for the H3 header, and then we're comparing HTTP versus HTTPS in there. And then we have our information about it. So for security, that. For SEO, again, our strong, so it's bolded, HTTP versus HTTPS, comparison on how it performed. So this is an example if you're going to have comparisons of what it could look like. If you're looking at having content in a problem solution focus, here is another great example where we have our problem in the H3, and then each of our items is a symptom, solution, expected impact. Here's an example of what, why, how structure. And you'll see we have here core web vitals explained. What are core web vitals? Why core web vitals matter? How to improve core web vitals. You'll see we're repeating that same term so that the robot, when reading it, understands all these. There are 2 navigational elements I recommend everyone includes to help with their overall site SEO and getting found by AI. It just helps robots better consume your content, and it also is beneficial to humans. The first one of those is having a table of contents, which includes jump links to areas further down on that page. Most modern CMSs will offer an option to include as like a widget or a little module, a table of contents, which will be based on your H tags. So you can typically in there say, show me everything that's H2, H3, however deep you want to go with it. There are a few ways, though, this can get messy. The number one thing to keep in mind, though, when creating a table of contents or adding jump links in general is when you set that anchor ID for the section you're going to, have it be something that makes sense and is descriptive, and make sure that it's in all lowercase with hyphens in between words. Having everything in lowercase with hyphens is much more of a standardization to help prevent breakage in the future, where if you always know that you use lowercase with hyphens and you have one that was accidentally named with camel case, let's say, you're going to end up breaking that. It just makes it easier for site maintenance. You want them to be descriptive, though, because they can be discoverable in search. And ultimately, as a robot reads this, you want to remind it what it's looking at and what content it's consuming. These last two best practices are really more preferences. I recommend always having smooth scrolling because it can be a really jarring experience from the human standpoint. If you click on a jump link and then the page flies by, and it can feel kind of nauseating sometimes. If you have smooth scrolling, it's going to move as if the person's actually scrolling to that section. And lastly, it is just convenient to have a back to the top option as you're going down, especially if it's a really, really long page and you want to get back to that table of contents really quickly. Additionally, breadcrumbs are a fantastic thing to enable. Most modern CMSs have an option to either enable or disable breadcrumbs. And breadcrumbs will be based on how your pages are structured on the site. So if you have a page, let's say a resource page, and then a bunch of additional resources, your system will see that as the breadcrumb there. Some best practices with these is you never want to have more than, I would say, 2 or 3 options for someone to click off of. So let's say that you sell shoes. And within your setup on your website for all of your shoes, as you get to like the actual product itself, it's layered with like 10 different layers. Instead of showing every layer there with shoes and then shoes by gender and then type and then event and blah, 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 instead of doing that, set up a breadcrumb where it's just showing that top level category. And this last recommendation is, again, one that is much more preference than anything else, but having a sitemap that's also made for humans to digest and read can be helpful. If someone comes to your website and they're just not sure where to go to find a certain thing, this happens to me personally on some e-commerce websites where sometimes accessories will be embedded under like a gendered option earlier in it, but then sometimes accessories will be their own standalone category, and then you'll go in between men and women. So sometimes it's just nice to have a sitemap to go to so you can quickly find the thing you're looking for, especially if you do not have search enabled on your site. All right, we're about halfway through the content. I know this is a lot. It's very long. Take a pause, take a stretch, get some water if you need it. And we're going to dive into schema markups and structured data. We're going to talk through why this matters, the different formats that you may see schema markup, and we're going to go through examples with JSON, which is going to be, I think, the most accessible way to add this markup to your website. There's also a handful of tools that already are created to help really automate this for you. We're going to talk about how to implement schema, how to test your pages to make sure that everything is set up correctly, and then lastly, how schema fits into supporting EEAT, which is the crux of getting found online for traditional search and AI. So jumping in, why do we care about structured data? At its core, structured data is going to enable features on Google search that allow our information to be more easily shared in different formats. It is going to allow AI crawlers to more easily read and understand the website. And we know AI loves comprehension. It helps with accessibility so that data is structured in a way that third-party readers can better digest the information. And lastly, as a human reader, having our data structured is a similar benefit to having our content structured, where it's just going to help make it a better experience overall. Now, at its core, structured data and schema markup is needed because when a robot comes to read our website, they don't really know what they're reading. So on the left here in red, I have an example of what could be on your site. We have a header, red running shoes, and it says price is $99.99 and the rating is 4.5 stars with 120 reviews. What doesn't the robot get about that? It clearly says it right there. AI may be able to discern that through contextual clues in the copy, but by default, the robots aren't understanding that $99.99 is a price in US dollars. They're not understanding that that 4.5-star rating is 4.5 stars out of 5 stars. They don't know what this means. They don't know what in stock means. And so we want to take all of our content on our site and we want to put it into the standard universal format that all robots read. And that is what schema is at its origin. Now, everything you ever need to know about schema can be found at schema.org. I'm going to go through common examples, the most important stuff for you to know, and a couple tools that will help you automate the creation of this. But just know anything else that you need, more in-depth information is all available on schema.org. Now, schema can be added to our website in 3 different formats. JSON, which is the recommended format by Google, and that's what we're going to talk about the most, microdata, and RDFA. This is what JSON would look like. Now, JSON is separate from the HTML code on your site. So you do have to maintain it separately, which means if you go through on your website and you make updates to the content on there, you need to make sure your schema is updated to reflect it. In an instance where your schema does not match the content on your website, Google will not necessarily ding you, but they're going to know there's a difference and they're not going to pay attention to it. The schema information is typically inserted either in the head or the body of the page itself, depending on what it's talking about. I mentioned with JSON, one of the challenges though is that it's maintained separately from the HTML. So if you make website changes, you need to go make sure your schema is also updated. Microdata solves that. Microdata allows you to add schema straight into the HTML. It can help in theory with that, right? Because now your schema is in the HTML. If you go in and you make a change to HTML or your rich text, it's going to change the schema also, but it becomes a bear. It becomes a beast. It's a lot of content. So it's not as commonly used, but it's still chosen by some people. RDFA is similar to microdata in the sense that it's added into the HTML, but it's not quite as commonly used. Now, there are a few legacy CMS will use RDFA as their method of choice. With these CMSs, they're automatically doing it, so you don't have to worry about making any changes, but it's important to understand what you're looking at. For the rest of this conversation, we are going to talk about JSON because that is most likely what you're actually using. Now, one big recommendation I have is to use a tool like technicalseo.com. They have a schema markup generator. I am not associated with them at all. It's just the tool that I go to use. And in here, you literally from this drop down would select the type of schema you want to make, and it asks you the questions and has a spot for you to input all the data that you need, and then it gives you your schema, easy peasy. I highly recommend using it. As even a professional, this is something that I still use instead of trying to handwrite everything. So let's start at the top. We're going to talk about organization. Now you'll see here that I have a column and it's organization type supported by Google. Schema itself exists outside of Google, right? Schema is a project between Google, Yandex, a couple other sites to come together and make a common language for use. Google, for some of these areas, has spots that it supports by default, and it understands if you have organization type airline, Google knows what that means. There are more organization types you can use. It doesn't mean that Google will know exactly what they are. What I recommend for organization is pick the type that makes sense for you that's also accepted and supported by Google. It'll just make the most sense. Now, there's a ton of additional spots for you to add information, so you can add more context here. But starting out with the organization, pick what makes sense to you. And this is schema that would go within your header because it should be present on your entire site, especially the homepage. This is an example of what schema can look like for the organization. So you'll see here we have type, organization, address, and within that there's address, type, address, locality, a couple other things. We have an email, fax number. This is what it can look like when you populate with all those different information options. Now, there's more that can be added to this. This is just an example of what you could expect schema to look like for the organization level. The second most common thing you are going to find is person level schema markups. Now, this is also critical for the author page, which we are going to be spending a bit of time on in a little bit of time when we talk about EAT and building authority online. The person schema should be used on any page where you're talking about a person. Now, if you have an article written by your CEO about, let's say, airline trends in 2026, that would not be the spot to use the schema markup. In there, you would use author markup and you would indicate who the author is and tie it back to their page. If you had an article, let's say your CEO wrote about their mentor, who we're going to call Bob for this example, for Bob, you would use the person markup to tell more about Bob. Person markup can be for any person alive or dead, real or fictional. So if you're writing fanfic over here about Twilight, you can use the person markup to make sure that they're differentiating between Edward and Jacob. So that's a deep cut for some people with it. But here's some examples of properties that you could include. And here's what it could look like. So here we have type person, you'll see right there. So this is an article or a page about Albert Einstein, or including Albert Einstein, where we can see his role is a patent examiner in this example, that he started in 1901 and ended in 1906. And then he was a professor of physics. So it gives us a bunch of information. For people who have passed, you can also include death date in addition to birth date, ton of stuff again. The tools that you use to help generate this will give you all those options. Article schema is the third most common schema that you should be using on your website. Now, articles can be divided into more specific types of articles or content. Google recognizes article, news article, blog posting. There are way more, though, available. These are the ones that, as of recording this, when I checked, that Google said that they support. Now, there's some required properties here. What this means is if you are missing one of the required properties, it's incomplete. It will not be read. You aren't going to be eligible for your rich snippet because your data is incomplete. So you want to make sure for any of these required properties that you have all the required properties included, and then recommended properties are just some additional ones to keep in mind. Publish date is where people tend to get the most off course when it comes to schema. Again, if you're using a tool, it is going to help you with all this, but your publish date needs to be in ISO 8601 format. So you can't just write the date however you want. We'll go through some examples of that in a little bit. But this is what it could look like for your schema markup for an article. So you can see here that we have the headline description. We've included multiple image options in different sizes depending on what is needed, which is just the best practice, as some platforms will display as squares, some will be portrait, some horizontal. You can see going through, we also have a date published and a date modified. That is important because if you make an update to an article and you want to indicate to the search platform or the robot or whoever's reading it that it's been modified and updated and you're keeping it fresh, that date modified is a great indicator of that. Now, the next one I want to cover is the FAQ schema. This can be a fantastic tool for use, especially when it comes to AEO or GEO, and I see it underutilized a ton or incorrectly utilized. The FAQ schema can be anywhere on your site. So if you have an FAQ page, obviously this makes a ton of sense. But if you have an article, or let's say you have a product pillar page, you can have an area at the bottom that has FAQ still. This is a great spot to put in questions that are literally the exact queries that people search. Your goal is to have the answer to the question. So if you have an FAQ, let's say you're building your sections here, go and look at what the most searched queries are and take that query and then answer it, and answer it concisely, where you're answering it immediately in the first line and it's only 2 or 3 sentences long. You're providing an answer. If you have data, pull data in, because AI loves data. They love a citation. And use this markup. It'll really help you get found. It'll help your content appear more often in citations and just appear more in search results. This is an example of what an FAQ schema markup looks like. Now, the number one spot that I see this go wrong is I will see people build this with just the question and not actually having the answer schema. So make sure you have your answer there also and not just the question. If you don't have the answer, it's incomplete. How-to guides and tutorials are great content to have on your site for SEO value. We make those more easily readable using the how-to schema, where we want to have our total time in that ISO 8601 format, which we have displayed below. You want to have any tools that are required for use, supplies you may need, And then each step, you can also include a video or an image with that step itself. This is an example of what the schema could look like. And additionally, product schema. Now, if you're an e-commerce site, this is going to be like the number one thing for you. Product schema is how we create a product and then also tie it to an offer or a sales price. So you'll see here, required, we need a name, image, and offer. So if it's available, pricing, etc. And then there's some additional properties you can add. The one thing I want to call out here with the product schema is when you have a review, if you do not put the max and min value for that potential review number, Google by default will assume that it is from 0 to 5. So if you are using a 0 to 10 scale, you want to make sure that you define that scale size, because Google by default is assuming that everything is stars and it's either 0 or 5 stars or somewhere in between. Here's an example of what the product schema looks like when put together. You can see here we have price defined, currency that it's in, availability, valid until because it's on sale, for example. Local business schema is very valuable if you have a lot of locations and you want to make sure that you are doing local SEO and getting found in that specific area. Now, I have seen recently more and more companies that are national that are actually setting up local business schemas for areas that they do business. So if you are a marketing consulting company, let's say, and I'm headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin. I may have a local business schema for Madison, Wisconsin, because we have a physical location here. But I do a lot of business in Chicago. So I may also want to set up a local business schema for Chicago because I have the ability to get there quickly. I do business there. I'm active there. So there is an angle in which you may want to be doing local SEO, even if you're a national level organization. This is an example of what a local business schema can look like. This one is for a restaurant, for example. And so Google understands for a restaurant, we're going to expect cuisine type, if there's reservations, what the price range is, etc. We have a reviews and ratings schema. Now, it's important to understand when we talk about this schema specifically, this is for websites that are reviewing other things. So if you have a marketing services company, you would not use this markup to talk about yourself. No self-reviews. Self-reviews are not allowed. These are reviews in which you're reviewing other products, people, things, etc. This is an example of what that review could look like. This one here is for Bluetooth, wireless Bluetooth headphones. You can see an example. And then we have the author markup. So this was written or reviewed by Sarah Johnson, who is a person. This author markup, when we are talking about the people schema, this is what it looks like on an article that's written by someone when you want to reference that person. And that would go to an author page in which we would use the person schema. Common schema mistakes. The number one mistake I see people make is messing up the date. They will just type in a date, and that is not how it is. That's not how it's ingested. You need to make sure that your date is in the correct format that it's wanted. Number two is having schema that is different than your actual page. Typically, there's not any malintent here. It is a page was created, the schema was created for it, the page was updated, the schema wasn't updated. And so there's a mismatch. But Google doesn't know that. And there are people who act nefariously who will have a different schema markup than what their website actually says. So you want to always make sure these two are matching. Duplicate schema is also common. If your duplicate schema is exactly the same, it's less of an issue. But if your schema is duplicated and the data is different between it, Google will likely ignore it because it doesn't know which one is true. And lastly, missing fields, which gives you an incomplete schema, which can make your data incomplete and can make Google ignore. Now, luckily, there are tools to help us validate if our schema is correct. I have two linked here. One is from Google, and then one is from schema.org. Both of these sites, you go and you can put the URL or the actual schema markup in, and it will it'll essentially tell you how it will render. For the Google result, it'll show you if you're going to get rich results from it and what it will look like. Now, figuring out your schema is only half the battle. The other side is how do we actually get it live? There's always the option to hard code it, manually adding your JSON there. If you're using WordPress or a more modern CMS, there are typically plugins you can use to help really manage this and inject your schema markups into the proper pages. You can use Google Tag Manager, and there's a handful of other options. So depending on your setup, if you just do a quick Google search, you'll probably find like 3 to 5 options to be able to add schema to those pages if it's not already built into the system that you're using. Also, feel free, message me on LinkedIn if you're not sure. Happy to help with this one. So the question of the hour, are you quotable? Is what you're saying worthy of being cited or being included in a search result? Now, everything we've talked about so far is technical SEO. Those are all components that can really hold you back or hinder your ability to get found online after you've produced good content. Your technical SEO, though, can be absolutely perfect, and the chance of you getting found online is going to be low if you are not quotable. So we want to make sure that we are quotable and our technical SEO is giving us the distribution that our great content deserves. You've heard me mention EAT a handful of times, maybe a couple dozen times. And EAT is going to be the foundation of Are You Quotable and Getting Discovered Online. We're going to go through what exactly it is, how EAT, which was created by Google for search, how it still applies to AI and how AI likes to consume content online, what you can do externally to your website in order to increase some of those signals for EAT, and then what you can do internally to help build those signals. First up, though, what is EAT? I've been saying this all video. EAT stands for experience, expertise, authority, trustworthiness. So let's break them all down. The first E we're talking about is experience. Now, do you have firsthand personal knowledge? Did you do this thing? Did you use the product? Did you experience the situation? It's the difference between reading something and regurgitating it versus experiencing it first person. Let's give an example. Let's say that you're reviewing a pair of headphones. If you have no experience with it, you may open your review with something like, this headphone seems high quality with good noise cancellation and a long battery life. It's probably the same thing that you can get from any website that is selling the headphones. If you've used it firsthand, your review may open with, I've used this headphone for 200 plus hours over the last 6 months, and here's like the thing that I love about it. You want to include things that show that you have firsthand experience with this, including specific time frames, number of hours, specific measurements or experiences that you would have, like how the headphones feel in your ears. Things that give it real world context will help increase Google's perception of your experience with it. Expertise is all about formal and demonstrated knowledge. So experience is about actually going through and living it. Expertise is, do you have some third party that said that you've done this and that you're smart at it? Do you have the credentials, education, or demonstrated skill to speak towards this topic? It's looking for formal degrees. It's looking for licensing, professional certification, in addition to professional experience. If you have had speaking engagements, award recognition, research published, years in the position, teaching positions, what it's looking for is a third party saying, you know your shit. As an example, if you have a blog post, and let's say it is about healthy eating, and it is signed off by Sarah Chen, digital marketer, that's not going to have the same weight as an article about healthy eating that's signed off by Dr. Sarah Chen, board certified interventional cardiologist, Johns Hopkins, Harvard University, blah, 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 right? You want to have those third-party qualifications that are saying you know your stuff. Authoritativeness is similar, where it's focusing on other people saying you know your stuff. So it's not focused on formal certifications, but it's other people mentioning you. It's other people citing your work. It's having received speaking invitations and industry awards and anything where it's someone else coming to you to get you to talk on that topic. Wikipedia is actually a really good source if you're already listed on Wikipedia. What I will say is North Face ruined Wikipedia for marketers. If you're not already listed or cited on Wikipedia, don't even try and game it. It's just a useless battle at this point. But if you already have Wikipedia articles that are citing you as an expert, that's gold for this category. Now, establishing authoritativeness is probably the hardest category to influence if you don't already have any established works. If you haven't spoken at a conference, if you haven't published any articles on other sites, if you haven't done any peer-reviewed journals, if you don't have other sources where you've already shown that you're someone people trust for expertise on this category, it's going to be hard to establish that authoritativeness. And you would want to prioritize this, actually. You would want to start finding those other sites to contribute to with the intention of building your authoritativeness. And lastly, trustworthiness. Now, trustworthiness is really a website factor. Can your business or your website be trusted? Do you have your website properly set up with the right security protocols? Are your security certificates recent? Do you have maybe a Better Business Bureau A+ rating? Are there other things that make your website seem trustworthy? We're going to talk about this a little more in depth after we go over the biggest thing, though, that will contribute to damaging your trustworthiness is if your website has no contact information, if your website has no privacy information, if it seems that you have fake reviews or any misleading claims, or if you're full of ads, anything that would make your site feel spammy. Any of that will ruin your trustworthiness. When it comes to AI loves EAT because it essentially follows the same format when it's deciding if you are site worthiness or not. AI is going to go through and it's going to look, are you someone that has credentials? Should you be talking on this topic? Is there appropriate data? Are you citing third parties? It's essentially looking at all the same stuff. So any work that you're doing to increase your EAT is also going to increase your site worthiness for AI. So let's get tactical and let's go over the biggest thing you can do to help get cited online. The starting point that I always begin with when building towards EAT is starting with your author strategy. How many contributing writers do you have on your site? I've done hundreds of audits, and you'd be shocked at how many sites will have, let's say, 40 to 50 different contributing writers, but 90% of their content was written by one person. What we want to aim for is starting with 3 to 5 active writers who each have 5 to 10 pieces of content that has good depth to it. We'll talk a little more about what that depth means, but start with 3 to 5 writers, and you want to establish for each writer what exactly their niche focus is. You don't want the same person writing about the financial impact of X, Y, and Z to also be writing about how to do a performance review, right? We want to keep people kind of niched out and establish their expertise in that domain. Pro tip. This can get really messy, especially if you have a larger company or a website with a lot of contributing authors. What I recommend doing is creating a spreadsheet where you have each contributing author written out and then links to relevant documents, and have either a folder or a Google Doc that you can put all the information about that person that you may need for their author page. It can be good to have it there in case they maybe expand their focus later on, but also just to be able to reference and make it easier on you to do your job. Last piece of advice, and this is going to sound ridiculous, don't trust people to know themselves. When you have your author list together, go and Google that person. Take the first stab at figuring out where have they spoken, where have they contributed to, what podcasts have they been on, what have they been doing. I recommend searching for all common ways to type their name or spell their name, and then also search for their Twitter handle, because for a long time, if anyone was speaking at a conference, the conference organizer or people be tweeting about them. So search for their Twitter handle, search for their LinkedIn URL, because likely if they are speaking or doing something professional, it's going to link back to their LinkedIn URL. There have been so many times, I can't even begin to give examples of when I have found that people have spoken at a conference or contributed to some white paper or done something, and I've brought it up to them and they've been like, oh, I completely forgot about that. It's happened to me. I have a spreadsheet for myself, to be honest, where I keep everything. It's also a lot easier for people to react to something than to start from scratch. So if you come to them and say, hey, here's a list of all the spots I think you've spoken at. Am I missing anything? You're going to get an answer much more quickly than saying, hey, can you please list out everywhere that you've spoken? So that's my little pro tip in this. I start a spreadsheet at the very basic that looks like this. So I want to have the author name, when their author page was last updated, and we're going to spend time talking about the author page, what on-site links I have that are priority that I want to make sure I'm including, and then what are external links that are of relevance to that person. And this may be where you have a tab per person, right? Organize it, whatever works best for you. But you want to have one spot that you keep all this together, because this is probably the most valuable exercise that you will do outside of making sure that your technical SEO isn't tanking your website. Let's start with the author page. This may take you longer to create the author page than does to actually create content, and that's okay because it's worth the investment. So starting off, we want to have a photo of the person. And we want this to be a real human photo, not an avatar, not a caricature, not an AI generated photo, an actual photo. Ideally, it's the same photo that's on their LinkedIn. So when Google and the other robots come looking, they see this photo and they see all this information, and they're able to validate all of that from a second source, LinkedIn, with the same photo and same information. Worst case scenario, they come to your author page and they see Joe Brown and here's his photo, and then they look for the photo and they find the photo associated with 30 other different people because it's a picture of some fictional character from somewhere. If they start seeing this picture is associated with a ton of different names, it's going to tank your authority. So ideally, same photo, professional photo that's on LinkedIn, that's used at conferences, guest posting, other spots on the web that are associated with the same name and information. One little side note, when you put in the author image, make sure you have your alt text set. Alt text is a little part of SEO that often gets missed, but can be impactful. And you just want to use the author name, like photo of so-and-so. Next up, their name and credentials. You want to use their full name, and you want to have it presented in the same format that it would be on LinkedIn and other publications they've written, etc. Use credentials that are relevant. Now, as an example, I have a project management certification. I don't list it anywhere because no one is coming to me for project management advice. I'm adding project management advice into my marketing advice because it makes a difference, but no one's coming to me for that. So I don't include it. Include credentials that are relevant to whatever the niche field that person's talking about is. A lot of what we've been talking about for this entire video has been what to do for robots to better read and understand your content. Professional bio is a very human element, and we want this to be written for humans. It shouldn't be a list. It shouldn't be a repeat of your LinkedIn. It should be a narrative-driven 2 to 3 sentences explaining who you are, what you do, and why you're talking about the niche you're in. What I recommend, as you may notice, I don't have examples here. What I recommend is take the niche, the industry, whatever that this author is trying to get known for or known in, go and find other people and see what their bios look like, because there's a good chance that there's going to be some kind of unwritten rules of how these should be structured. An easy spot is to look at conferences that this person could potentially be speaking at and look at the bios on there, because conferences almost always require some author bio that's read when they're introducing who the person is. See if there's trends in formality, if people tend to include certain qualifications or credentials, and follow that format. As a reminder, professional bio written for humans. Now back to the robot optimized content. So for education, you want to list out in terms of most recent or highest achieved degrees, where they've earned degrees from and what they've earned. You want to start with the terminal or graduate degree and make sure that instead of putting acronyms down, you write out what it is. Now, MBA, for example, is a commonly accepted acronym. Everyone knows what an MBA is. I have an MSBA. You probably don't know what that is. It's a Master's of Science in Business Analytics. So I would write that out in completion. And then write out the school. So I went to UW. Where is that? You don't know. It could be University of Washington or Wisconsin. It's Wisconsin. So I would write University of Wisconsin. So write it out. Don't assume that people know the acronym you're talking about. Write it out, and then ideally link to that website or relevant content with it. Credentials follow the same rules. Start with most recent and what would have the most impact if it's seen, and make sure that you are including links to verify credentials. If you have a license number, include it in the list and then link to the verification database where someone can easily see that, yes, that is still an active credential. That's the right number. The goal here is to help establish that expertise and make it easy for robots to verify the data that we're saying is accurate and recent. Professional experience, you really want to focus on the most recent 5 to 10 years, especially if you're working with an author who has a longer career history where they've been in a handful of different organizations and roles. You want to list out the title and then the organization and link to the organization if they are one that is well known, and only include information beyond 10 years if it's relevant. If they started their career as one of the first employees at Facebook, put that in there even if it's 20 years ago, because that's going to help establish their expertise, as an example. Also, feel free to include responsibilities, duties, and anything that would show an impact or any metrics you're able to share of what they achieved when they were there. If you are writing this for a head of sales and they reach President's Club every year that they were a seller, put that in there, right? Use this as a way to brag about the person that you're writing about. Publications and research is an interesting one because oftentimes these are gated. So if you have an author who has contributed to like peer-reviewed journals and they've done academic research papers and they're gated, I recommend trying to link out to articles that are covering them in addition to including the actual link to the paper itself. In an event though, where you have, let's say you're more of an academic driven field and you have an author that has like 10 published papers and they're all gated, when the robot comes to read that, it's going to follow that link and see that it can't actually see the end content. Typically, though, there are requirements where you can't just give that content away for free. Someone is charging for it somewhere. And so to get around that, find a spot where that content was written about and referenced, or if you are actually able to share that publication, that piece of work for free, I would link directly to that subject matter. I know there's a lot of regulations around it, so don't get yourself in trouble for it, but always try to include links that will take the robot to somewhere else that verifies that whatever you said actually happened. Speaking engagements are very similar, where again, we want to focus on recent history and we want to only include ones that are relevant. Now with speaking engagements, you can potentially link out to a YouTube video of the session. You could actually embed it if you want to, actually embed the video in the author page. You can link to their bio page. And oftentimes conferences are linking back to the person's author page on the website. If it's not, you can always reach out and ask them to. But this can be a great spot to get some interlinking going. Feel free to also include relevant podcasts if they've led any workshops. I would recommend only including items though that you can link out to. If they've led a bunch of internal trainings, but there's nothing documented or nothing to prove that, don't add it unless it's extremely, extremely compelling. And then awards and recognition. With awards and recognition, the number one spot that I see people go sideways is they will assume you know what they're talking about. So let's say that someone won a Grammy. Cool, like we all know what the Grammys are. They're a thing. What you want to actually say on the bio is they won a Grammy in blah, 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 blah. And then put down when it happened, any other relevant information. Don't assume people know what you're talking about. Be really specific. I'll give an example. I won a Shorty award, and I was pretty jazzed about that. And when I say Shorty, if you're a marketer, you know what I'm talking about. But that's not what I put on my LinkedIn. It's not what I put on my resume. I put down that I won a Shorty award in B2B communications for a project that I did with Spotify. Be specific and link out to examples. Professional associations run similarly to work history, where you want to focus on the last 5 to 10 years. You want to focus on ones that are active and ideally ones that you can verify involvement. So lead with where you've had leadership roles, board roles, anything where it's more than just a member at large. And link to spots to verify. I feel like that's the nail that I keep hammering on is verification. Link out to spots to prove that what you're saying is actually credible. And lastly, social media links. Now, social media links can be interesting because there's definitely some industries where people care about them heavily, and there's some where no one cares, where you could have an industry leader and they have 20 followers on LinkedIn because it's just not part of their industry. It's not something they're active in. Use your judgment on this. What I recommend is if they have an account that they're active on and that it's professional, by the way, don't include anything personal, anything controversial, anything that you wouldn't want people to see. But if they have an account that they're active in, that they've posted in the last, even month, I would say, include it. If they have more than 5,000 followers, include the follower count. To us, it might not feel big if someone has, let's say, 6,000 followers on a platform. But if you're in a really, really niche industry, that 6,000 follower count could be amazing. And you could have hundreds of engagements per post. So always put down follower count, link out to the platform, and only include professional active accounts. Now, pulling it all together, this is an example of what your schema markup could look like for an author page. Again, there are tools you can use to help build these. You don't need to hand code all of these, but you want to start with having the human readable version of the page together first, and then go and add the information in as it's relevant. Just sharing again the link to the tool that I use. Again, not affiliated with them, just a good tool to use to help make some schemas. So next in our authority building author strategy area, we're going to talk about external links. How do you get backlinks to your author page and to your website from these? Now, backlinking is important, even in the age of AEO and GEO, where oftentimes when AI is citing people or facts, they're not sharing links. Backlinking is still important because it builds credibility. It's showing the robots that there's other people out there who think you know what you're talking about, and they think so with such confidence that they're linking to you. So backlinking is important. Now, good backlinks will come from sites that have a higher domain authority, targeting 50 and above as like a good signal. They're relevant to the topic. They're coming from editorial content, not from paid promotion. If you are doing content syndication or paid promotion from someone, put a no follow on that link so you don't get dinged for it. Comment if you need more information on that. Happy to talk more about that. But the links that are good, they're featured in the bulk of the content in the article, not sidebar, not just in like the author byline, but they're in the content itself. They're not marked as no follow, and they're going to relevant pages on your site. So if you have a backlink coming in from an article about like the best equipment for drilling, and you have a page on your website about drills, that's a good link. You wouldn't want to go from this article about drilling to a page about hammers, right? It's not as relevant. So you want to have good linking. Ideal world is we get links in from sites with domain authority above 80. They're editorial content, they're highly relevant, and they're niche. So like we know this is a good site and they're linking to only experts in this niche and they link to us. That's our ideal target. Now, depending on the field that you're in, there may not be a lot of relevant sites that have a domain authority that high. So if you have a link coming in from like a 50 to an 80, 50 to 79, industry publications, for example, those are still good to have. Well, we care a little bit less about our lower value links. So if you get a link coming in from a site with a domain rank of under 30, where it's not as relevant, maybe it's more of like an industry listicle. Typically, this is where they come from. It's just a listing. Not as relevant, but it's not toxic. You do want to keep an eye out for toxic backlinks. Now, any SEO tool that you are using worth their weight will have a way to analyze your backlinks. And these will be coming in from sites that are typically scamming sites. Oftentimes they're adult themed content. It can be links that you're getting because someone is just spamming it into a bunch of comments, but they're toxic. And the tool will tell you they're toxic. You can actually submit these to Google to be removed. So what you want to do with these harmful, toxic backlinks is make a list of all of them and then upload that list into Google Search Console. It's called a disavow list. So upload it to Search Console. You'll say, I'm disavowing any association with these, get rid of them. And then Google will process it and it'll remove its connection of that backlink to your site. Now, it doesn't remove the actual link. So someone somewhere actually has a link to your site from whatever this toxic thing is, but Google will disconnect the association. On Bing in Webmaster Tools, there's no way to manually do this, but Bing has said that their system goes through and disavows it essentially, that they don't count toxic backlinks towards you. They recognize they're toxic and they just ignore them. If you have a link coming in from content syndication that's being flagged as toxic because it's a paid promotion link, reach out to whomever's in charge of that and just ask them to add a no follow tag. They should have done it by default. They may have not. And if they didn't, they should though know. I'm sure you are not the first person to ask for a no follow. They should know what that means and what to do with it. Now, how do we get more backlinks? Backlink building is actually a crazy industry. There are companies that charge like $500 a backlink sometimes for links from reputable sites because it can make that big of a difference. The ways to organically build these, which we're going to talk about, and we will talk about paid in the future, but or to organically build these, the number one way to get backlinks is to make good content. The number one way to get found online is to make good content. Like that's the root of everything. But make good content that people want to link to. Something that I always lean into in any past roles I've been into or when talking to clients is how do we get original data, or how can we take any industry data we have that's not commonly available and how can we share that publicly? Original research is not as hard as it sounds to make. It sounds like a huge lift, a research study, thousands of people. I've seen companies that have sent out an email survey with 3 questions and gotten 60 or 70 results, and they have turned that into a research report. You do not need that much data to count for original research if you're finding something interesting in there. One example I want to share of a company that does this really well is metadata. So metadata is a platform that B2B companies use for advertising. They have a ton of data because their clients spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year advertising. Instead of doing something that would take a lot more work, like a customer survey or such, they literally just made the data public. They aggregated it together and then they anonymized it. And so you can see it based on industry, on segment. You can see it based on LinkedIn versus Facebook. You can't see for this client how much they spent, so it's anonymized in that sense. But they just made it available, and then they shared it with people. And so reporters and a bunch of people in the industry use it as their source. I previously worked at a company that also did this with what I would call newsjacking. And so if they saw something was starting to trend globally or there was a global event, they would reach out to their contacts in media and say, hey, we just looked and we pulled this data really quick. Here you go. And they would send it over in a chart format. Sometimes it was even Google Trend data that's publicly available, but they would aggregate it together and they would send it to the reporters so they can easily just use it and they would run with it and get a backlink from that. Original research and industry data is so much easier to actually pull together than anyone thinks. I have a trillion ideas on it if anyone wants to chat about that more. Comprehensive guides are great to have. Tools and calculators. HubSpot has a website grader that I have seen linked from, I think, almost every industry and vertical type of site ever. Infographics are good, especially if someone wants to share data within an article that they're writing. Case studies, as long as they're ungated, and if you're using actual data and have actual numbers shared on an improvement that someone saw or a lift or such. Now, a lot of this falls under digital PR, which I think of as the connector between your really great content and people learning about your great content to use it as a source. There are a couple different avenues that you can take as just an everyday marketer, everyday business person. Haro is a great one, help a reporter out. In recent years, Haro has been much more popular, and so it's harder to actually get bylines from it. I would say I get maybe half a dozen bylines a year that will come in from Haro requests. And what this site, Help a Reporter Out, does is you register as a source and you can subscribe to different topics, and they will just send out every day, hey, we had reporters who are looking for a source on this, and they'll put in what they're looking for. And then if you see something that's relevant, you just reply via email to that individual line item and provide your data. They may connect with you, they may not. I think the percentage of times I've responded and it's actually been used as a byline is probably sub 1%. So there's a lot of noise in there. But if you have no industry contacts and you're totally new to it, it's a great spot to start. If you're on the B2B side, Mention Match is essentially Haro for B2B. It actually used to be called Help a B2B Reporter Out. And so it would typically be either reporters covering the B2B segment or sometimes marketers at other B2B companies that are writing blog posts and want to be able to pull in some third-party views from it. I found much more success with Mention Match. It's also a smaller audience, so you have less competition of people who are actually responding to it. The big goal with all of this, though, is to become a source for journalists. So if you see someone who is covering news in your segment, start interacting with them on social. You never know if they're looking for a new source. I feel like everyone who writes always is looking for a new angle or new detail. And if you can provide stuff of value to them, they'll often use it. So ultimately, and this goes back to what PR is in general, is forming those relationships. But there's nothing that stops you from building those relationships as an individual marketer or business owner. You don't need a PR person to build it. The PR person just likely already has that relationship. Lastly, the easiest way I would say to get backlinks into your site is to go be on other people's podcasts, join as a contributor to a blog post. If you see someone is doing a roundup, let's say, of industry experts and you can contribute to that, is getting involved. I think of this almost as like little ways that you're contributing content. So you're not writing an entire article that they're just publishing straight up, but you're joining on a panel, you're joining on a podcast, and typically they will have a bio for you. And in that bio, you should have a link to your author page on your company site. That is the strongest connection you can provide. Now, if you are going on also, let's say, a podcast, you can also mention your website and that will get included in the transcription. It'll get linked out. That's a hack people used to do quite often, is they would try and just get as many like transcription mentions for the website as possible. So the transcription on the site would have a bunch of backlinks for it, but it's a little bit gimmicky. But you can still mention the site. It's good to send people that way if they're interested. The only difference for AI is that we're not backlink building, we're brand mention building. AI doesn't always look for backlinks, it will also look for mentions. But how do we get mentions? The same way that we get backlinks. And so if you have a journalist who writes an article about industry trends and you're quoted in there, that is your brand mention. That should be a quick win for you to be able to get cited by the AI. So the same work that you're doing to build backlinks is also going to build brand mentions. Now there's one other area that combines these two that we haven't talked about, and that is brand mentions online with no backlinks. This happens quite often, and it is low-hanging fruit to monitor and to send an email and just ask for a backlink. I would say 25 to 30% of the emails that I send for myself or on behalf of clients trying to get a backlink from an existing mention will actually update. Now, there are also more aggressive things you can do here where you can monitor broken links on competitors, other stuff. But starting with brand mentions with no backlink is use tools like SEMrush, Ahrefs, even just Googling your brand name and adding in, you'll see this example here where it's brand name minus site : yoursite.com. If you use that query with that format with your own website, it's going to show you mentions where that mention is not linked to your actual website. So I recommend once a week, once a month, whatever frequency you want, go through, look for these, and then send an email, just ask for a backlink. You'd be surprised how often you can get one. So next on our authority building roadmap, we've talked about the author page, we've talked about external links. You have another avenue that you have a lot more control in, and that's internal linking. So where are you tying that author to internally? What I guide clients to do all the time is to really create a topic cluster for that author. So if we're doing traditional SEO for a keyword, we're going to have a pillar page that's optimizing for that keyword. It's like 5,000 plus words, everything on the industry, a ton of links, a ton of data, super, super rich page. And then we're going to have a bunch of pages that link to it on subtopics. And those are all maybe 2,000 to 3,000 word pages that are also really, really in depth, but in depth about a narrower focus. I recommend doing literally the same thing with your author, where their author page and where you have related internal blog posts or articles that are published, their author page is your pillar page. And whatever their niche topic is, they have a page out to that, and then they have all these other pages that feed into it. Think about it the same way. You want to build these internal clusters for linking, not just for your SEO content, but for your author page itself. The rule of thumb I use on any of these pages that are designed for SEO is when someone reads this entire page, are they going to need to Google things still? So let's say you have a pillar page on optimizing images for your website. Are they going to need to, after reading this, Google, how do I decrease an image size, or how do I minify it? How do I blah, blah, blah? If so, add that into your pillar page. The ideal scenario is they go to your pillar page and they learn everything they need to know about that topic. So that's my kind of litmus test that I'll think to myself, after reading this, will the user need to Google anything? And if so, what will they Google? Now, trustworthiness is really established on your overall website. You want to make sure for your website you have contact information of humans who look like humans. Ideally, you have titles, image, link to LinkedIn, links out to things that show that they're actual human beings and people, and not just like one guy in his mom's basement pretending to be 20 people on a website to try and get your credit card information. We want to avoid being red flags and seeming scammy. You want to have an about page for your company that is well built out, that doesn't just talk about what the company does, but also what's your mission, what's the why behind it, who are maybe some of your members of leadership, that again, links to their author pages, links to their LinkedIn. You want to have all of the policies that you need, especially if you're doing paid advertising anyways, you need to have these policies in place. And ideally, you're pulling in social proof where you have examples of other human beings that are not paid to say you're great, that are saying you're great. At minimum, saying you exist and that they've used your products and services. So The more legit your website as a whole looks, the higher your trustworthiness is going to be. All right, let's chat through our final section, how to use paid advertising to really accelerate everything that you're trying to do organically. Everything comes down to taking time or money, and you can exchange one for the other. So a lot of these organic strategies are going to take time of you consistently doing them to see any benefits. You can use money to accelerate that so it takes less time. It's a trade-off though. Ideally, you have a good organic strategy that's going to bring you traffic and support your business, and use paid to supplement it. If you do not build your organic strategy and execute it well, you are going to have to spend more and more money advertising to get the same result that another company would that has a good organic strategy. We are going to talk through when it makes sense to use paid advertising, how to make that decision, PPC and how you can use that for organic strategy informing, paid social promotion, how it fits into that, strategic link building, because sometimes you can pay your way to better backlinks. And then ultimately, I'll provide an example of what a hybrid paid and organic strategy can look like. So let's dive in. The reality that we live in is a lot of these organic tactics are going to take a couple months to see a result. Now, I have been seeing in recent months with the advent of AEO and GEO that clients are seeing the return a lot more quickly, which is awesome, right? Think of paid as a way to really just pour fuel on the fire that is your organic strategy. Paid should always supplement your organic strategy, never compete against it. So let's talk about a brand new website. Launching a new website is the perfect use case for using paid advertising. Now, when you have a brand new website, you don't have any inbound links coming from other sites. You don't have backlinks. You oftentimes don't have traffic coming to it. You don't have people who are already engaging with that content in a way that's sending positive signals to Google. You also don't have remarketing audiences for more marketing activity. Retargeting is one of the best performant advertising tactics that you can use across the board. And by using paid advertising to drive more new traffic to the site, you're going to start building funnels more quickly and be able to build even a lookalike audience more quickly. So my recommendation is to have a strategy you're going after that is complementary to your organic strategy. If you know that there are very specific keywords you want to rank for, even if they're not highly competitive, start with paid so you have initial traffic around those keywords. You can see what works and what doesn't work, and keep an eye on how your organic traffic is performing. If you have a keyword where you start seeing you're getting similar or even more organic traffic, stop bidding on that keyword. You don't need to. You're on the first page. You're already owning it. This is a great way to get those first customers in the door more quickly. The most common reason I see people use paid advertising is in order to rank on keywords that have a really high competitiveness. Now, let's say you are a brand new company coming into the space and you want to sell AI optimization. There's a lot of other companies that are doing that. And so it's going to be really hard for you to organically rank, and especially to organically rank quickly for those keywords. I have clients that are well established in their industry that get a lot of organic traffic, and there are still keywords that they're bidding against because organically it's just near impossible to actually rank for them, especially if you have any terms that are associated with, let's say, government or education related things. Now, what I recommend here is focus on the competitive keywords for paid, and then have an organic strategy that really focuses on optimizing for related or long tail keywords with that. That'll allow you to help grow that organic side and not have to spend that organic energy on something that you know you're going to need to use paid to offset anyways. Now, one thing that is common though with competitive keywords is you may see that your actual cost per acquisition or even cost per click, or sometimes even the CPM on those competitive keywords is extremely high. Always look at what that traffic does. It's okay to spend $75 on a click if when that person clicks and buys, they're going to spend $75,000. You want to make sure you have a positive ROAS from your paid activities, and you're always looking at overall how that audience is performing, not just that individual cost metric on the platform itself. Seasonal businesses can be really interesting, especially in your first couple of years of operation, because you don't have the same time frame that other businesses have to be found organically and to rank, especially if you do something like snow removal. You want to make sure that when someone needs you and they search, you are the top one to show up. And it can take a lot to rank organically for that. It's also a very competitive keyword. My recommendation, if you have a seasonal business, is to start your PPC activity 4 to 6 weeks before you actually expect demand to start increasing. You want to get in there a little bit early. You can test your ad copy and creative to help your quality score go up and get that activity coming in ahead of when the surge is going to happen. If you are in a seasonal business, I guarantee you during your heavy business period, the cost per click, cost per CPM, everything is going to be a lot higher. Anyone who does advertising from mid-November to December experiences this. And this year, actually, CPMs and CPC started going up even in early October as the holiday season started early. A product or service launch follows similar benefits to a new site launch, with one big added caveat. If you're launching a new product, you can actually use paid advertising on social or PPC to test messaging to your already engaged audiences. So if you're thinking of coming out with a product, and let's say that you are trying to decide between calling it an operating system or an ecosystem, you could test ads with that language, specifically targeting your audience, and see how it performs before you actually use that messaging in a product launch. It's a great way to have that initial validation. Personally, I have done that many times when working with product marketing leaders who are stuck deciding between 2 or 3 different terms. Reputation management as a service is often tied in closely with PR. This is something that is offered independently by some online businesses, but it's something that you may also have to run into in your day-to-day life. Oftentimes, if we have an article online or a link that is prominent, going to something that we do not want people to see, it's much easier to bury it than to try and remove it. What this means is, let's say that you just had a massive layoff at your company. You could bid on the term company name plus layoff, and you can then have search results that show up that are linking to positive articles instead of the negative press about it. Now, you want to be strategic with it. Sometimes if people see you bidding on terms that don't feel appropriate, it can become a different PR fiasco. But ultimately, paid advertising is a great way to get control of the search control of the search results for those terms that you want to rank for. Similar to what we talked about with product launches, using paid as a tool to test an organic strategy is a fantastic use. This doesn't have to be a big budget item for you also. Let's say you have an audience you think that is going to buy your future product. Having a campaign targeting that audience and seeing how they respond with even $500 of promotion can give you insights to help really narrow in to that target audience that you want to engage with. I'm a huge fan of this for messaging, seeing what keywords you're resonating with, and partially mining search terms. It's something that used to be done more often, but what you can essentially do in Google is you can just give Google your entire website and just go see what it finds and see the terms that are coming in from it. Keyword mining is what it's called. If you want more information on it, let me know. I'm happy to make a video. It's kind of a fun thing. But this, I feel like, can almost be like a secret weapon that not a lot of people think about. Now, this is more of a marketing tip. I find oftentimes marketers don't think about sharing campaign results beyond their initial team. If you take campaign results and let's say you're testing some different messaging, some different images, different audiences, oftentimes sharing this with your product marketing team can actually be super valuable. So I would encourage you, if you are a marketer who's running paid advertising or is involved with the paid advertising team, share this data with your product marketers. I will almost guarantee that they will thank you for it. Now, there are a handful of cases in which paid advertising does not make sense at all that I see people commonly do. First up is targeting low commercial value keywords. Just because there's a term associated with the audience you're trying to engage with does not mean that you should rank for that term. Not everything has value. Similarly, looking at the keywords that you're already ranking for organically and bidding on top of them. Now, we need to go more in depth with this when it comes to branded keywords. But if you are already first page results, let's say you have 4 or 5 results on the first page for whatever keyword you're going after, you don't need to bid on it. You're already there. And lastly, if you don't have enough money to sustain advertising, the worst thing to do is to spend money on advertising for 2 weeks and then turn it off and not touch it again for 6 months. If you engage with paid advertising, it should be an activity that you know is going to be continuous, and something that you can afford to do. Low commercial value keywords. What I mean by commercial value are keywords that maybe have volume, maybe search, maybe they get people to your site, but they don't actually drive qualified business. If you have keywords you're going after and you see that that audience comes to your website, you put them into a retargeting bucket, and when retargeting them, they perform, cool, keep those keywords in. But if you have terms that are just associated with your industry that you want to own because you want market presence, don't expect them to have commercial value. I treat those campaigns completely different. My recommendation with these, if you have a keyword that you want to own from a branding perspective, create an organic strategy to own that keyword. There may also be other avenues that you can get there. If you know that there is a keyword and you see a couple publications that always are on the first page of results for it, partner with them. Do sponsored content. Find other ways to get in front of it instead of spending advertising budget on traffic and keywords that will never convert. This is the one that kills me the most, and I see people do the most often, is continuing to bid on keywords that they are already ranking for organically. Now, there is a school of thought in here where people will bid on branded keywords no matter how well they rank for them. They will bid on them because they don't want their competition to bid on them. I can tell you from firsthand experience, I have worked with companies like that, and the number of times that their competitors are not even bidding on them is not zero. You should always be looking in Google Ads at your auction insights, which will show you the other brands that are bidding on those same keywords. If you're already ranking for it and competitors are not trying to encroach on that land, you don't need to spend money on it. There's other places you can spend that money. And lastly, if you do not have enough money to advertise, don't advertise. If you cannot afford to be spending $100 a day on the audience you want to target, don't do it. There's nothing worse than starting advertising for 2 weeks, because advertising, paid promotion, does impact your organic performance, and you're going to see an improvement. And then when you turn that paid advertising off, it's all going to tank. Instead, use whatever budget you have on tools that can help you organically rank for them. Link building is another spot to look at, where maybe you can use that for content promotion or for bringing in some contributing authors that will help build authority in the space. There's other spots to invest that money that is not related to paid advertising that can get you a positive result. This is how I think about, should I run paid advertising or not? Feel free to pause this video, take a screenshot. Do I have enough budget? Am I going against really competitive, aggressive keywords? What is my competition doing? What do I expect for the actual return in terms of average contract value and lifetime value of the client or customer that I'm acquiring through this channel? And how much will it cost? Okay. This is hands down my favorite part of PPC in general. I will say paid advertising also has a lot of these benefits, but PPC has something very specific. It allows you to test keywords that can then influence your organic strategy, so you don't spend time and energy creating a bunch of content for keywords that aren't going to be valuable to rank for, or you're never going to rank for because they're so competitive or they're low performing, and so you don't actually want to rank for them. The process is build your organic keyword strategy, and then essentially take it and run some paid advertising behind it for a period of time. Ideally, you're running for at least 2 weeks so you can capture any differences that you would see during days of the week or between weekdays and weekends and such. But build your campaign. You can even do just a subset of the keywords, see how it performs for 2 to 4 weeks, analyze your data, and then build your organic strategy based on your best performing paid keywords. Rule of thumb: if you have a conversion rate above 3%, that is great. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but when we think about email marketing, and sometimes like a 0.5% click-through rate is amazing for a campaign. If it's 3% or above, make it organic, go after it organically. You may still need some paid promotion behind it, but make it a priority. If you have a keyword that even with thousands of impressions is not converting above 1%, skip it. It might not be a keyword to even consider for paid advertising, but definitely isn't worth your time for building organic ranking for it. Now, the best approach, as we've discussed, is using paid to offset that time it takes for organic to grow. What this looks like, if we're thinking about an annual paid advertising budget, The first couple months, we're going to use about 40% of our budget. We're going to front load it. Now, it's not exorbitant. We're not spending 80% in the first month. We're spending about 40% of our budget in the first few months so that we can get that initial findings. You're going to find when you're targeting more diverse keywords, you need to spend more to get the same result as when you're only targeting like the top 20 performing keywords. So start a little heavier. I would also encourage you to include more top of funnel conversion points here. So perhaps having a goal of getting people to sign up for your newsletter or to opt in to different content versus driving straight to the actual sale. Focus on that. Use this as a time to test which keywords work, what messaging works, and where your highest performing audience is. Moving into month 4 and beyond, at this point, those keywords that you've prioritized for organic growth should be bringing in traffic. So now we want to scale our paid budget back. We'll also need less paid budget because we're not going to be spending money on the keywords that don't convert. So pull your paid budget back. Keep an eye on how organic traffic is performing for keywords, especially compared to how paid traffic is performing. If you find that an audience is doing better organic and you're just wasting your money on paid, cut it off. Move that money somewhere else. We always want to think with paid, where is it that we can deploy our dollar to get us the best return? So ideally during this time, you're seeing organic start to grow, finding spots where you can water it a little more. So at this point, 70% of our budget is already ate up figuring out which keywords are most valuable to target, building an organic strategy, offsetting it. At this point, we should just be bidding on paid keywords that are highly competitive, ones that we're bidding on for brand protection, or terms that we are not yet ranking for organically because it just takes time because they're competitive. Now, there isn't a world in which I would recommend turning PPC and paid advertising off completely. What I recommend is getting to a point where you're maintaining it. So your paid advertising strategy is very specifically going against things you're not ranking for organically. You have a very specific purpose for every dollar you're spending, and you're deploying that dollar in the spot where you're going to get the greatest return from it. We talked briefly about the benefit of PPC data for giving you organic insights and insights to share with your product marketing team and other internal teams. A couple areas that I think are unique that you can get from paid advertising that's much harder to get from organic or you have less control over it includes geographic performance. So you may think that the Northwest, for example, could be a hotbed for you, but you don't have a lot of organic activity there. You haven't been there yet. So you can use paid advertising to test before you actually start building there. PPC is also a quicker route to learning which keywords you should be avoiding, as you're going to be spending more money on advertising, get more impressions on them than you do organically. So as you build your negative keyword list for advertising purposes, you can also be pulling that back into your organic strategy. Messaging that works. We talked about messaging. It's one of my favorite use cases for paid advertising. Test messaging that is being debated internally, especially. Make sure you share that data with your internal teams. Now, actual search volume is one that I want to spend just a moment on. When you are in Google Ads, they have a keyword planner, and that keyword planner will give you estimated volumes of traffic for different keywords. Moz, SEMrush, all the tools will also give you that anticipated volume. There are times where that is completely wrong. Wrong for a couple different reasons. One is there may be something that happens in the world that makes that keyword pop off. But number 2 is maybe it's a keyword that doesn't have a lot of historical data. It's a term that is newer into our lexicon. And so the historical data there is just not accurate. It's just not good. By running paid advertising against those keywords, you can see what the actual volume is. You'll be able to see your impression share. So you can see, hey, in December, I spent 10 grand and I got 20,000 impressions, and it was 30% of the impression share. So that gives me an idea of how big that overall volume actually is for that keyword. Some best practices when it comes to leveraging PPC for SEO. These are my recommendations as someone who has ran PPC for a couple decades. I want to caveat that these recommendations are going to be different than what a Google rep will tell you. Your Google account reps are salespeople. Their goal is to get you to spend more money in their platform, not necessarily have better performance. Now, in theory, if your performance is good, you'll invest more money in the platform, you'll spend more money. Yeah. but they tend to make recommendations that are really designed to run up your budget before it's designed to increase your ROAS. So number one is when you're running these campaigns, leverage phrase match or exact match. Google will tell you to use broad match. In the platform itself, Google Ads will recommend that you use broad match. Don't. If you're going to test it, see how it does. What I find with broad match is that it's often going to bring in keywords that don't actually make any sense. There's been so many times where I have been running campaigns for a client and I've seen traffic coming into campaigns on phrases that make no sense, that are not related to the business at all. And lo and behold, they are always either broad match or AI max. Don't use them. If you're intentionally testing a keyword, make sure that you are looking at exact match or phrase match. Creating dedicated landing pages for your paid search traffic is one of the lowest hanging fruit items to help really optimize across the board. If you are sending people who are searching for very specific queries, if you're sending them to your homepage, which is in theory optimized for letting people self-segment into more information they want, it's not the best purpose of it. If you are bidding against, let's say you are a headhunter and you're bidding against the terms open roles in DevOps, you should send them to a landing page that has that keyword they're bidding on included in the landing page. There's a ton of ways you can do this dynamically where you don't have to make a million different landing pages. Again, let me know if you want to hear more about this. Happy to talk about it. Third, track conversions properly. I cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure that you are tracking conversions before you launch your campaign. You do not want to only evaluate your PPC performance based on impressions, clicks, ad quality score, the metrics that you see in the platform itself. You want to look at how is that traffic actually behaving when they get to my website. Are they converting? Are they staying? Are they churning? How much are they spending? You want to see all of that because that's what really makes a difference. Countless times you will see an audience that will perform well on PPC or social for this matter. Actually, a lot of these also apply to paid advertising and paid social. But you'll see an audience that does well in terms of clicking on the ad itself and clicking at a low cost. As the platforms optimize, they will serve your ad to more and more people like that. That's not who you want coming in. You want to be okay with spending a little bit more and engaging with an audience that maybe doesn't perform as good on the platform if it means that when they get to your site, they're going to convert. So make sure that you have conversion tracking set up. Personally, I like to look at every stage of the conversion funnel. So if you send them to a landing page and then they go into a qualification stream, or they go from landing page into a contact form that has some questions on it, that's like a 3-stage form. Look at every stage, see where they fall. Test different variations. Partially, it's a wasted opportunity if you're not testing different ad copy and creative. But secondly, you're not going to have as good a performance because you're not going to be able to optimize against as many different things. So always test 2 to 3 different headlines, 2 to 3 different descriptions, 2 to 3 different images so that you can really see what's working and not working. Now, by default, you will have the option to test way more than I just said. I think it's like 10 headlines, 3 descriptions, I think up to 20 images. Limit the number of variables that you are testing so you can have enough data and results. The rest of these we've talked about in other sections, but the one thing I do want to call out is using remarketing to capture and engage audiences that already know who you are and have been to your website. Sometimes people come to your site and then they don't actually buy your product for 6 to 8 months. It is not unheard of. Typically, when it comes to paid advertising, your retargeting and remarketing audiences are going to be the best performing in terms of driving actual customers. So don't ignore what happens to an audience after they've come in and already started engaging. There have been multiple times in my career where I've turned off lower performing campaigns and then ended up seeing my retargeting campaigns just take a total nosedive. It's because that audience coming in, they weren't ready, which is why the campaign wasn't performing well in the first place, but getting them in put them into that retargeting funnel that kept them nurtured until they were ready to buy. So you always want to look at how is everything performing across the entire customer lifetime. Now, on the do not side, I'm not going to read through the whole list, but the one that I really want to call out is do not expect immediate return. As a marketer, the thing that kills me more than anything is when I hear someone say, we're happy to invest in paid as long as you can show an ROI. especially if your sales cycle is months long, or if you're selling a product that has an annual contract and you know that you're advertising to someone who already has a vendor in place and you don't know when their contract is coming up. Do not look at just the return on that advertising spend, your ROAS, within a week. Look at it over a longer range of time. Because if you are only running paid advertising with an expectation of an ROI tomorrow, it's not going to happen. You may have a leader that looks at it that way. You may have a CEO you report to that really wants to see an ROI tomorrow, or a CFO who's asking you to prove the value of these programs immediately. That is a whole other conversation we can have. But just know, as the marketer and the one running the campaigns, not to expect an immediate ROI. Paid social is similar to PPC, except in the intent side of things. So typically PPC, you're bidding against a search term or a keyword that someone is searching because they are looking for that product or service. Paid advertising, you're interrupting their feed and hoping to grab them, to get their attention and redirect them to your thing. Sometimes it is a remarketing audience where they've already engaged with you. They've already maybe gone to some product pages. You know that they're in market. But it's not always. A lot of times when you're running paid advertising, you're targeting audiences that you do not know are actually in market, and your whole goal is to pull them into your funnel for more retargeting. With that caveat in mind, we talked about how PPC will not necessarily have an immediate return and not to expect immediate ROI from it. With paid social, or any time that you're targeting a colder audience, you should expect that return window to be even long. What I recommend is focusing on educational content and providing value through paid social advertising before you ask them to do anything, like give you an email address, a phone number, or heaven forbid, ask for a demo request. Those should be done in retargeting after you've already engaged with someone. Lead with the great quality content that you're already creating for SEO. Budget-wise, on the lower end, $500 per platform per month minus LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a little more expensive. It tends to be a higher qualified audience. The rule of thumb that I go with is $100 per audience per day for a good campaign budget. That means if you are targeting 2 or 3 new audiences and you're targeting your existing website traffic and you're retargeting customers who've churned, that's $500 a day. So if you want a good, healthy budget for testing, $100 per audience per day, at minimum $500 per month, $1,000 a month on LinkedIn. I've listed out here what you can expect for some CPCs. Now, these are broad, these are generic. There are a bunch of tools and resources that can help you get more precise for benchmarking within your industry. If you have any specific asks, message me on LinkedIn. I feel like that's like the catchphrase here, but leave a comment or message me on LinkedIn if you want anything specific. I have a bunch of resources to better benchmark these. The last avenue of advertising that I want to chat about is native advertising. Now, this can be really hit or miss. I typically find that native advertising is much better for just brand awareness and not expecting any actual conversions from it. Native advertising, in my professional opinion, should always be tied in with retargeting on other platforms, especially if you're using a platform like Taboola or Outbrain, who I think are probably the 2 largest. You're going to find through there a really low CPM and oftentimes a really low cost per click, but they're probably not going to do anything. It tends to target people who are already engaging with content online, and it serves them ads that look native, where it looks like it's just another recommended article. So if someone is already scrolling around New York Times or Forbes or whatever website, and they're reading content and engaging, and they click on it, yeah, they're probably going to want to read that content, but the likelihood that they actually are in market and want to take action is pretty low. Now, there are a bunch of targeting options here. I would say the platforms have all done the best they can at trying to give options to target people in market while also respecting privacy laws. But end of the day, this is going to be very much a top of funnel play. If your budget is low, if you're not sure about paid advertising, if you don't have the expertise in-house to run it, I recommend considering different link building services. So if you are thinking about investing in a backlink strategy and working with partners on it, these are the buckets that I recommend starting with. Number 1 is digital PR. It's likely going to be a good investment across the board because you'll get media training, you'll get feedback on content. They'll help you really build a strategy to be known online, in addition to pitching you and your executive team to publications, to journalists, to try and get those placements through bylines or being included in an article. I am a revenue focused marketer. I've spent my entire career generating revenue from marketing activities. I am a fan of PR and brand. A lot of times, the revenue focused marketers will kind of shit on PR, but PR serves a really important function, especially if you want to get found online and you want to help help crafting that story that you're telling. Guest post placement is something that often comes in conjunction with digital PR services, where they are going to try and submit your executive team or individuals for guest writing on different industry publications. This is something that you can also do on your own. Forbes grew to the size they are because they used to have a very large contributor network, which they have shut down almost completely and made it actually pretty hard to get involved in. Typically with these, you pay to be a contributing writer, and it isn't always pay for placement where you're paying per article that they share. But typically they will say it costs this much per month and you can submit X number of articles. Usually they will respect your content and they will not remove your backlink. Sometimes they do though, so just beware. The low cost version of all of this is using Haro. Haro is Help a Reporter Out. I spoke about them a little bit before, but if you didn't see that section, Help a Reporter Out is a service where you sign up as a source and then they will email you a list of what journalists are looking for. You can opt into different categories. And so once a day you get an email saying, hey, we have journalists who are looking for a source in accounting for cannabis companies or blah, blah, blah. And if you match it, you would just reply to whatever the ask is. I find oftentimes the actual success rate is pretty low, but it just costs you 5-10 minutes of your day. There's typically not a large actual financial cost with it. There is a version of Haro for B2B called Mention Match. I'm a huge fan. I highly recommend, if you are in the B2B space, sign up for Mention Match. It used to be called Help a B2B Reporter Out. I swear it did at least. Maybe that's a Mandela effect, but I'm a huge fan of that, and that is another way to go. Now, if you are, let's say you're an independent business owner, you're running something on the side that you're trying to grow, Haro is a great spot to start because the cost is low, if not nothing. Now, lastly, but worth mentioning here, is there are services that will just focus on getting you backlinks based on your existing content or where you may already have broken ones. Oftentimes, these companies will go through and they will find competitors that have similar content, similar space, that have broken links, that have not reached out to these publications. And so there could be a blogger who is an influencer in the HVAC space who wrote about some technology and they linked to your competitor for it. The link building people, they went and they found that, they saw that it was broken, and they reached out and said, hey, saw this is broken. I actually have an alternative that you could use. If you want to use it, here it is, bam. I, as a website owner who actually had content, I used to run a company that had about 40 contributing writers. I've been reached out to multiple times by some of these broken link building companies with them saying, hey, your link is broken here. Here's a replacement for it if you want to use it. They've always been very courteous. What I literally cannot strongly enough advise you against is engaging with link farms, PBNs. Oftentimes, these are sites that will guarantee a certain number of backlinks, and it's usually an exceptionally high number, and it's a really low cost per link. And what they're doing is they're literally spamming you everywhere. They're adding your site to a bunch of like listicles, a bunch of really shady spots, and you do not want that. The chance that Google will penalize those links and see them as toxic is extremely high. Similarly, there are people in Fiverr that will charge you like $50 for 100 backlinks or such. It's the same thing. Fiverr, they may not own the websites, but they're going through and they're just spam linking your URL in comment sections or forums. Similar to the Fiverr approach, there are services that are automatic backlink builders. Typically, they run in the same method where they are just adding your URL to comments. It is spam. Less likely to get flagged by Google as being toxic. It often will tend to comment on more legitimate sites, but still, it's not a positive brand affiliation. I do not recommend doing it. And lastly, if anyone ever guarantees you first page ranking, especially for a competitive keyword, just close the conversation, delete the email, block the sender. No, there is 0% chance that they are doing that without either using black hat tactics, which are going to get you banned or at least dinged by Google, or they're typically using link farms, which gets you back to that same spot of you just having a ton of toxic links coming in. Let's say that you have a $2,000 a month budget that you're going to set aside for link building. Here's how I would split it up. I would take half of that and put it towards digital PR because that's going to be your biggest bang for the buck. In addition to helping you get placements, they are going to help you with your overall strategy, which is going to help you make better content in general. I take 500, I'll keep that for Haro or Mention Match, and I'd also put in this bucket expert roundups. So sometimes they're pay to play where you can contribute your expert opinion to an industry publication. I think it's in the same bucket. So I put those together. I would add in a little bit of budget. So here I have $300 set aside for guest post outreach and placement. So trying to place your content in other publications. Sometimes what this really takes is having a VA or having someone internally that they're going to spend time reaching out to publications, doing the research and pulling it together. I have $200 allocated for tools and research. Now, personally, I am a huge fan of Ahrefs when it comes to technical SEO, and I'm a fan of SEMrush when it comes to the rest of SEO. SEO tools are a great spot to find backlink potentials because you can get an aggregated list of all of the sites that are, let's say, backlinking to a competitor or backlinking to a friendly. So it can help you a lot on the research side. There are a ton of great VAs who focus specifically on link building. You can find these on Upwork, for example. What you can expect, depending on your vertical, is looking somewhere between, I would say, like 150 and 250 for your actual cost per link. If you're in a more niche audience where you have a smaller potential audience to get into, they're probably a lot more competitive. You're going to be seeing that cost increase quite a bit. If you're in something that's a bit of a broader industry or MarTech in general, you're going to be seeing that cost a little bit lower because there are so many industry publications. So now that we've covered paid advertising and the different options, let's talk about how paid and organic really fit together to help with your SEO, AEO, GEO. First is paid as a channel to drive more backlinks. So taking your great content that you're making, which ideally you're making based on an SEO strategy, and promoting it to the right audiences with the goal of garnering backlinks. Second is using your paid advertising results to influence that organic content. So if you see that there is a specific search term that when you target against it, you get phenomenal results, make content for that. If you find that on your Facebook advertising, there is a subset of your larger audience that performs really well, make content for them. Use paid and whatever's working in paid and double down on it from an organic standpoint. Remarketing, as we talked about, remarketing tends to be the most performant audience when it comes to paid advertising. So looking at retargeting all of your organic traffic, specifically, you can build audiences based on who is coming in from certain keywords too, depending on how your UTM parameters are set up. I am more than happy to do an entire video on this. I love paid advertising. Let me know if you want it. And lastly, conquesting. Conquesting is one of my favorite things to do as an advertiser. And that is where I'm going to pick a competitor, or it could even be a friendly or just someone, pick someone that has the audience I want, and I'm going to go steal it. Now, it's not quite stealing because we're not mutually exclusive, right? The person can follow whoever they want. It doesn't mean that they're going to stop following that other person and start following me. But if it's a competitor, I want them to stop buying from that competitor and start buying from me. So picking the brands that you're going to go against that you want their audience and conquesting them and taking them. That wraps all of our examples. Now, next up is going to be the appendix of the deck, which becomes the video. In the description down below, you are going to see a bunch of timestamps for things that I think could be relevant and helpful. Those timestamps are going to correspond to slides that are coming after this one. What I'm going to do is essentially go through the slides and let them be on the screen for about 20 to 30 seconds, pause it, and take a screenshot if you want it. Everything also in here is also in the ClickUp doc related to this, but we'll go through. I'm going to share things that I think could be relevant and helpful. And lastly, connect with me on LinkedIn, send me a message, or leave a comment if there's anything else you'd like to hear about. I am on a mission. I have a mandate, the way I see it, to make marketing more accessible through making information and good practices more easily available. That's my goal. So this content is in support of that mission, and I'm happy to produce more content to help anyone with their marketing.